Hello everyone, I'm Denise Love, and here's a little preview of what we're going to be doing today. So let's get started. So I had somebody ask for a request on how the dip pens and things actually work. They didn't get it. So I thought I'd just show you like some different dip pens that you could consider using in your artwork with different nibs. And you know, the one you always see me use is this brass nib, and you can see as I come closer to the camera there's little ridges in that nib, and what happens when you dip that into ink, the ink sits on the top of this is what you see, but it also goes into these grooves, and then as that tip touches the paper, the ink flows out of those grooves onto the paper. And because this nib has so many grooves all around the tip, it's all around it there, it holds more ink than a regular dip pen, and it makes circles, which regular dip pens just don't let you do. Regular dip pens just go basically in a line, because regular dip pens, and I've got several different kinds, my very favorite one is this Kakamori nib, and it's the same Kakamori that makes the brass nib, but they just make a really wonderful nib that draws really beautifully. But I also have, you know, inexpensive nibs that came with pretty holders, and I thought, ooh, those could be fun too. And then this one that's got like a really extra sharp tip, and you can get lots of little nibs and tips and all kinds of stuff for your pens. Let me just show you back here on my table. You can get all kinds of nibs for your pens. Like, look at all these different shapes, different sizes. Some of them are going to give you a thicker line, some will give you a fatter line. Some of these are really fat and just all kinds of interesting. A lot of these are for calligraphy, so if you see things talking about calligraphy pen nibs, that's what a dip pen is traditionally thought for, is doing calligraphy writing. So all kinds of yummy choices. One of these came as like a big set, and you know, just they're easy to change. Let's say that you're like, okay, I'm tired of this nib. You just pull it out, and maybe you want to use this nib. You just push it right back in where you pulled that out, and you're ready to write with the new nib. So it's not hard to change your tips out. And most pens fit all the nibs, but the Kakamori brass nib is different. You see, these are kind of like half circles, and usually you have like a circle here in the tip of this pen, and it just slides in part of that circle. Some of these are a little different, and these brass nibs don't fit in to all of the dip pen things. It may or may not. See, this one's too small. This is probably the very first dip pen I ever had. See, and again, it's kind of small. I might could force it, but it doesn't really go in. So with this brass nib, you kind of need to buy one of the pen holders that they recommend in that brass description, like where they're actually selling that, because it doesn't fit all the holders. This has a little different holder because it's a very set circle, and I don't know, it just doesn't fit into some of the universal holders. Whereas these half circle ones will fit into practically any holder that you want to put it in. And you just have to look in the end and push it down, and you're set. So, let's see, I took the nib out of this one. Not sure which one I had in there, but it doesn't matter. I just wanted to show you. We'll just stick a random nib in there. So a regular dip pen works by dipping the ink in, and the ink sits kind of behind that nib, and it just sits there a little bit, and as you press that nib down on the paper, that ink starts to flow down until it's out, and you can see why, you know, there wouldn't be very much ink that could sit back there on the back of an ink pen, so it doesn't last very long. But if I go ahead and dip that in, these draw mostly in a straight line, and you just have to practice with your pressure to get, you know, what it is that you're thinking that pen should do, and then it runs out of ink and you have to dip more ink. And so Oop, I went to wipe it off and I pulled it right out of the holder. Just to show you some different nibs here. Again, you can see the ink right up under there. Just kind of sits right underneath it, and then as it hits the paper, this is like a little thing that kind of splits a little bit and allows that ink to come out of the paper, and you can almost see that split. If I get up really close, let's see if you can you see how that splits open on the paper there? That's what allows that ink to then touch the paper and start flowing out. So it just depends on how much you press as to how thick or thin that line is going to be and how long that ink is going to last. And then you keep re-dipping it every time it kind of runs out of ink. And then clean your nib off every time you use it. These, when you dip them in, you can see kind of goes up into the grooves there, and that's what we're kind of flowing the ink down from. So as I'm doing this, and I can make it go around in circles, and once that ink starts to run out, I can pick up more ink. And then what I discovered last week, and then you want to wash that off immediately. Have water handy. Frequently wash that in water. I just kind of have a microfiber cloth and I kind of clean it like that, and that's how I keep that clean. If you ever have ink stick into the grooves, you can take like a art knife, X-Acto knife, and you can just come up through the grooves and kind of push any ink out that maybe you've let dry in there accidentally. That's how I have cleaned this nib out in these little grooves, because that's about the only thing that's thin enough to get in there and let me scoop out anything that I might have got stuck in there. Be careful, and I work away from myself when I do that, but this is a knife, so you have to be very careful. Yep, so this one, what I just discovered is, you know, I leave the ink sitting open as I'm working on my table, and the longer the ink sits there, it kind of starts to dry a little bit, and then it gets real thick. And I have discovered that when it gets real thick, it's too thick to run out of those grooves as you're drawing. So recently I was doing something and I'm like, man, this pen don't work anymore. I think I broke it, or what's the matter with it? And see, I like doing dots with this pen, and you see how long I can work with it compared to how long I was working with dip pens. And I can do circles, and it still may be kind of thick because it's filled up to the top now. I had gotten a brand new one and I poured it into the old one, and I wouldn't recommend you do that. And then I let it sit on my table as I'm working, which is fine, and it starts to dry out and it gets too thick. And because I had 2 inks worth in there, I didn't have any more room to put more water. So I think I could water it down a little more. So if you're using a water-based ink and it's not working the way you think it should, you can definitely add water to those and thin them back down, because I hate to just throw it away, and it works just fine with some water added to it. This Kakamori one, that's a regular nib, is such a really fine line, and it seems to work a little bit longer than the other ones that I have too. So it is my favorite regular dip pen. And then the other kind of dip pens that I have aren't really a dip pen. They're architectural ruling pens, but you can kind of control the size of the line by controlling this little screw over here, and you can make the lines thicker and thinner, and they've got like a little rounded side where more ink kind of sits in there. And I use these like a dip pen, and you can see now it's got ink sitting in there, and now I can kind of start writing or drawing. Maybe if you haven't left any room for the ink to come out, it may not come out. So you just got to practice with these. And it basically does straight lines. It doesn't do curves or anything like that. It's harder to write with it. It's not really a calligraphy writing pen. It's more of an architectural drawing instrument that they use to draw lines along rulers. But I think it's fun to experiment with as an art supply. So that is, and these nibs come with oils on them, so I just used some toothpaste and got the oils off these nibs so that the ink will stick to it. Because if it's a brand new nib and you go to dip it into the ink just kind of slides off and doesn't even stick to it. So clean that nib with some toothpaste. And so that is basically how I use these and how the ink sits in them and what happens when the ink gets too thick and what you might consider, you know, as your art practice. What do you like? Which one appeals to you the most? So I hope that's helpful in cleaning it and seeing how the ink goes into each one of these and the type of line that you might be getting off of the different ones. And you know, the cheap ones to me are a little harder to use because the metal is so thin. I think that's why I like this Kakamori one so much, because it's a really heavy duty nib compared to some of these that came in a big pack. The metal is so super thin, like these were just kind of stamped out of a piece of thin metal, that I almost don't like them, and that's why I haven't really pulled them out. But I do have them, and you never know, one day I might want to get those out to play in them. So I hope you enjoyed seeing how those work, some of the differences, and some tips on making sure they're going to work for you with the oil on the tip and the ink being too thick or what have you. So I will see you next time.